From setting up trainees to be hated, to unfair screen time distribution, to some of the most obvious favoritism I've ever seen, I-LAND 2 was one of the most insane survival shows I have ever watched. And I honestly can't believe how much MNET is still able to get away with. Hey everyone, and welcome back to my second video in the Riggory of K-pop survival show series, where we talk about all of the unfairness, all of the manipulation, and all of the overall riggory in K-pop survival shows that brand themselves as fair competitions for all of the contestants participating. Before I go any further, I need to give a special shout out to the YouTube channel The Drag Detective, who inspired this series with their Riggory of Drag Race videos that talk about the MTV series RuPaul's Drag Race. If you like this video and you like Drag Race, I'm sure you'll love all of their content, and I should also clarify, even though I do truly believe that this show is rigged and that it could have been made to be a lot more fair, this is just my opinion, and I'm not trying to claim that MNET was doing anything illegal with how they handled the show, so put your lawyers down, okay? MNET, if you're watching, don't even try it. But yeah, with that out of the way, let's just jump right in and talk about everything wrong with I-LAND 2. I-LAND 2 is the second edition of the MNET I-LAND series, which first produced the group Enhypen that is managed by Belift Labs, a subsidiary of Hype Corporations. However, IZNA, the group formed by I-LAND 2, will instead be managed by Wakeone Entertainment that manages Kep1er and Zerobaseone, and will have their debut song produced by Teddy Park from YG Entertainment / The Black Label, which is pretty interesting. This is a bit off topic, but I'm really curious as to why Hype had no involvement in I-LAND 2 at all, considering Enhypen is one of their most prominent groups. I mean, the only real connection that I-LAND 2 has to Hype besides the name of the survival show is that one of the contestants on the show was also a contestant on Hype's survival show Are You Next?, which ended up forming the group ILLIT. That contestant was Jimin, but obviously she did not debut in ILLIT, and what I'm kind of realizing is that Hype basically replaced I-LAND 2 with Are You Next? I mean, ILLIT is also managed by the same company as Enhypen, so I'm guessing there must have been some weird behind-the-scenes conflict that separated Hype from the I-LAND brand and name, but I don't know what it is. Either way, back to the topic at hand, I-LAND 2 just ended and selected 7 out of 24 total trainees to debut in the group IZNA. And as someone who didn't watch I-LAND 1, this was a completely new format that I've never seen before, and I was a pretty big fan of it, but I quickly realized how unfair it was to basically half the contestants right from the get-go. The first performances of I-LAND 2, which we'll call the quote-unquote auditions, were used to separate the top 12 trainees from the bottom 12. In small groups of 3 to 5 contestants, each trainee was individually evaluated by the 5 quote-unquote producers of the show, who also acted as mentors and coaches. These producers were Monica and Lee Jung from Street Woman Fighter, producers from the Black Label VVN and 24, and former Big Bang member and current soloist Taeyong. Each contestant was judged on a pass-fail basis, and if at least 3 of the 5 producers passed a trainee, they were sent to a living and practice area called I-LAND. Those who failed to impress at least 3 would instead be sent to an area called Ground, that lacked a lot of the luxury and comfort provided by I-LAND. After this initial sorting, each new mission would force some trainees out of I-LAND, and grounders who did the best in each mission would be able to take their places. Anyone still in Ground at the end of each mission was eligible for elimination, and the trainees with the 2 worst scores given by the 5 producers would be eliminated. This eventually led to the elimination of Kim Eunchae and Yuiko after the first mission, and Kang Jiwon and Nana after the second. This format was made to create drama and high stakes between those in I-LAND and those in Ground, and was setting up a lot of potential underdog stories for the Grounders, or some fall from grace stories for the Islanders. However, I don't think any of the underdog stories properly played out. While arcs such as Yoon Ji-yoon's fall to Ground were some of the most central factors to the entire show's plot, it seemed like the only real relevant characters in the entire show were the original 12 Islanders. Now, some of you may disagree with me on this, and I know each of the original Grounders had thousands of supporters, but I still think the show treated them all as secondary characters to the other 12 contestants. There's a lot of analysis and commentary to back up this claim that I'll be getting to soon, but I think the most important piece of evidence that proves my claim is this. Out of the top 12 contestants who made it into the second stage of the competition, 11 were original Islanders, and only 1, Nam Yuju, was a grounder after the initial audition performances. And she didn't even make it into the final lineup. Of course, there are ways to argue against my point, the most obvious being that those who were chosen to start an island are simply more skilled, but I also believe that all of the grounders had great potential, and some of the later performances proved that there was some serious talent outside of the first top 12. Additionally, usually for survival shows, most people are able to argue that it isn't rigged because all the eliminations are decided by viewer votes. Of course, that opens a whole new can of worms for discussion, but anyways. But yet, you can't make that argument in this situation because the first 4 eliminations were decided completely by the producers. Producers who were always vague when they were giving feedback and seemed to be heavily biased. Contrary to how I've been sounding, I actually don't mind this sort of format in theory. I liked that the professionals in the industry were given more power than viewers at home who largely don't understand whether someone's ready to debut as a K-pop idol or not. However, I think a lot of the judging done by the producers was complete BS and was used to manipulate how the viewers viewed certain contestants. Which brings us to my next point. I don't know about the rest of you, but personally, I don't think a lot of the judging actually reflected how the producers felt about each performance. Rather, I think a lot of the critiques and scores given were made to create and develop certain rivalries and other storylines the contestants had. So even if someone performed really well, I think there were multiple instances where the producers would say that a group or trainee did worse than they actually did to fit whatever narrative they wanted to curate. And vice versa, of course. For example, and let's just go with the most obvious one, let's talk about the Rain on Me performances from the unit missions. During episodes 4 and 5, after the first 2 contestants were eliminated, the 12 contestants in Island and 10 remaining trainees in Ground competed against each other in teams that were dedicated to either vocal, dance, or self-made choreography. So the Island vocal unit would be judged against the Ground vocal unit and so on. And in a surprising turn of events, the Ground team won both the vocal and dance unit battles, leaving the self-made choreo quote-unquote creative units to duke it out in the final match. You might think that this contradicts what I said about Islanders being favored, but we'll circle back to that. Anyways, the final units were tasked with self-choreographing a routine to a cut of Lady Gaga and Ariana Grande's song Rain on Me, and were judged not only based on how well they danced, but for the storyline of their number and the creativity and quality of their choreography. Something important to note is that the Island team had 7 members while the Ground team had 5 because 2 people had already been eliminated. So the Grounders were given a somewhat harder task because it's more difficult to make grand formations and images in a dance performance with less people. Still, even though the Islanders won, the only Island unit to win, I pretty firmly believe that the Grounders had a better narrative and performance and only lost to protect some of the trainees who were still in Island. I mean, let's just do some comparisons. With only 5 people, the Grounders were able to use just their bodies to imitate a motorcycle, an umbrella, and a mirror, and even made an illusion of a reflection. Meanwhile, with 7 people, the most unique thing that the Islanders did was use a different part of the stage and make a slightly worse looking umbrella. And whatever this was. I don't even know. You can say that the Islanders did better, but if you try to take away as much bias as possible and simply look at it based on the performance and creativity, not only were the Grounders more creative, but they also just looked a lot more clean in their performance when they were dancing. What I think really happened here was that Ground losing fit the show's storylines with trainees Mai and Sujung. And additionally, as I said before, MNET was able to protect some of the trainees in Island by making Ground lose. One of the most memorable storylines in the entire show was the drama between Mai and Sujung. In a later mission, Sujung would be shown to be talking to the other girls about Mai's vocal tone and how she thought it was nasally. However, Sujung would also laugh about this and say that she wasn't going to tell or help Mai because it's a competition and she didn't want to help someone she's competing against. So in my eyes, having Mai, who was in the Island team, beat her in this unit mission was a way of MNET trying to create disdain or conflict between the two, especially because Sujung had already shown herself to be extremely confident. So, when she, an experienced street dancer and choreographer, lost to someone who had never choreographed before, I think MNET knew it would make her upset. Furthermore, in this mission, for every Ground team that won their battles, 3 trainees from Island would have to move down to Ground and be replaced. Since the previous 2 Ground units won, at least 6 Islanders would be demoted. And at the time, quite literally 6 of the 12 girls in Island were original Islanders as well. So, if Ground won the creative battle, at least 3 of the original Islanders would be forced out, which wouldn't be what MNET wanted. So, surprising no one, after Ground lost and 6 girls in Island were chosen by the producers to leave, 5 out of the 6 girls who were kicked out of Island, guess what, were original Grounders. And the 6 girls who replaced them, yeah, that's right, they were all original Islanders. 6 out of 6, literally all of them. So even after 2 missions had already gone by, and 4 girls had already been eliminated, 11 out of the 12 girls who were originally chosen to be part of Island were still there, and none of the 12 had been eliminated. meaning that all 4 of the girls who had been eliminated were original grounders, and only 1 was no longer in ground at that point. Again, you could argue that it's just because of a skill issue, but if you're trying to tell me Kim Min-sul wasn't one of the best performers in the entire ground team, especially that round, then you're just lying. The original grounders proved themselves multiple times at that point that they were more than capable performers, arguably better than some of the other 12. And yet, they were constantly under-edited and/or given overly harsh critiques for no obvious reason other than the producers didn't want them to debut. Again, I honestly like the idea of having professionals make decisions regarding eliminations and rankings, but it would only ever be fair if the judges made an effort to be unbiased, and that definitely didn't ring true here. Nana was one of the best whackers in the entire show and had an excellent performance being the center for a large amount of the Islanders' Rain on Me performance. But she was given the second lowest score on her team and was even eliminated in the same round. Just bogus decision making across the board. There are so many instances of blatant riggory when it comes to producer critiques and feedback, and if we went over every single one, we would be here all day. So I'll just go over one more to really drive my point home. Let's talk about the performance of ITZY Song Cake by Choi Sol, Kim Eunchae, Yuiko, and Nana in episode 1. This audition performance was very obviously the worst of the entire round. Filled with voice cracks, awkward facial expressions, and unpleasant vocal tone, it would have taken an extreme amount of editing to make this performance look good. Yet for some reason, 3 of the 4 girls were initially sent to I-LAND after being passed by a majority of the producers, even though the feedback they were given was mostly negative. Obviously, none of those 3 were able to stay in I-LAND because they were immediately voted out because the producers sent too many people to I-LAND, so the Islanders had to vote to send some of them to ground. But the question that I really want to ask is, why were they even sent to I-LAND in the first place? And this is just speculation on my part, but I honestly believe that the majority of the cake performers were passed in order to spark outrage from the viewers. Based on fan culture and reception from previous shows, it's very obvious that a quick way to gain publicity for a survival show is to have a trainee that fans think doesn't deserve to debut. Trainees such as Dahl from Boyz Planet, Chai Bing from Girls Planet, and Kim Minkyu from Produce X101 were all trainees who received mass hate trains during their shows because they were viewed as untalented and undeserving of their spots and placements. Because the producers would like these trainees at first and give them high scores and rankings, even though the viewers didn't think that they deserved them. Therefore, fans brought attention to the shows by publicly hating on them and eventually celebrating in each of their eventual eliminations. And even though fan culture like this is extremely harmful to the reputation and mental health of these contestants, they're great for ratings, and that's always what MNET prioritizes. Therefore, I wouldn't be surprised if the producers didn't want any of the cake girls to be sent to I-LAND in reality, but decided to pass them for the ratings. But of course, that's all speculation. I think some, probably around half the critiques shown, were fair and non-problematic, but when there was a chance for them to increase the drama level with their feedback, the producers took it, sacrificing integrity for viewership. But that's the thing with survival shows. They basically all do that because they're TV shows before they're competitions, and they care more about drama because people will watch something dramatic before they'll watch something fair. And that brings me to my last point in this video. Because for a show that prioritized being entertaining first and foremost, I-LAND 2 was really boring. Although I'm not a fan of Riggory and survival shows, I as a viewer am aware enough to understand what I'm getting myself into when I start to watch one, and I'm basically able to get over it. I do my best to look past the biased editing and let my own judgment dictate how I feel about each trainee, but besides that, I honestly just try to enjoy the show for what it is. A television program, and I try to immerse myself as well as I can into the theatrics of everything so that I can have a good time. Unfortunately, I don't think I-LAND 2 was overall a very good show, and I spent a majority of the 20 hours I invested watching this show bored. And I think the biggest contributor to this boredom was how predictable everything was. I started watching about halfway through around episode 6, and I caught myself up on everything in a single sitting because I had a day where there was just nothing I had to do, and I felt like getting into another survival show. And by the time I caught up, I basically figured out 5 of the 7 people who were gonna be in the final lineup. I mean, out of the top 6 I posted a couple of weeks before the finale, 5 of them debuted. And if you're right about most of the final lineup that far before the show ends, you start to feel like, why am I even watching this towards the end? Because you know what's gonna happen. The editors essentially spoiled the results a whole month before I-LAND ended. Of course, we were all shocked and upset when Fuko ranked 8th out of the 10 in the final voting and didn't make it into the group, but to have that be the only real shock in the finale, besides I guess them adding a 7th spot to the lineup, that means things could have been more interesting. If MNET really wanted to make things dramatic, they would have pushed an actual underdog contestant who wasn't just an original Islander who got unlucky once or twice. And we would have gotten fully fleshed out redemption arcs for trainees like Park Yeon, Lingling, Kim Min-sul, or even Nam Yuju. Yes, Yuju made it into the finale and was the most successful out of all of the original grounders, but she was majorly sidelined in part 2 of the show, where she could have become a main character and made a lot more buzz around the program. I mean, she was the only original grounder who survived to part 2, and MNET didn't want to do anything with that. It just seems like a missed opportunity. You would think that when a survival show only has 24 contestants versus the usual 99 or 101, they would be able to give better screen time and character development to all of the girls, but the MNET editors have again proven themselves incompetent, much to the disappointment of me. Now, before we go, I just wanted to share my opinions and feelings on the final lineup and give some closing remarks. And honestly, I'm extremely satisfied with the girls who ended up debuting in IZNA. Although I would have preferred to have had Fuko in the final lineup, especially because I always like to support the older contestants in survival shows, I think all 7 of the girls are extremely talented, and I'm especially happy because my one pick, Mai, made it into the group, even though she was one of the most hated contestants. Yes, I do think Mai was favored, but I genuinely liked her, and that didn't stop me from making her my one pick. Additionally, because the group's music is being produced by Teddy, at least at first, I think all of the members fit a more intense girl crushy concept, and I think they'll probably be really successful as long as their debut is actually good. And regarding the eliminated contestants, I honestly hope that they're all given the chance to debut, even though I know that's an unrealistic hope. Specifically, I think Min-sul, Sujung, Lingling, Fuko, Yuju, Giri, and honestly a few more are all basically debut ready, and I mean, if they were in the same group, that would just be even better. If they could be in one of those project groups like Even or JBJ that are just made of non-winning survival show contestants, I would so be tuned in, and I'd probably even talk about their debut on my channel. But back to IZNA, I am really happy for them, but I actually don't know if I'm gonna stan because I always need to hear their debut first. Obviously, because I watched their survival show, I know and like all of the members, but I need to make sure that there's good music coming from the group before I decide if I'm gonna follow them regularly. Regardless, whether I stan or not, Mai is always gonna be a bias of mine because she just seems really sweet. Even though I think I-LAND 2 was somewhat bland, the contestants were naturally very charismatic, and there weren't any of them that I disliked. But yeah, I mean, I guess that just kind of wraps up this little survival show review / video essay. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to watch the Riggory video I made on Girls Planet 999. I actually really like making videos like this, especially when they give me an actual reason to keep up with survival shows. So if you want me to do this for future survival shows, or even want me to cover past ones, let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you all so much for watching, and one last thing, I have just reopened my channel membership program, so if you decide to become a member, you'll gain access to things like my Discord server, where I'm doing mini comeback reviews, hosting game nights, and just chatting with everyone. So consider becoming a member by clicking the join button down below for all of the perks that I mentioned before, and also a few bonus ones that I didn't talk about. Thank you all again so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace out.